The same family china I set every year gleamed beneath the roast they never touched. Still, I placed each plate perfectly. Debbie, Brady, Lindsay, though they came holding takeout bags, not thanks. As the scent of soy sauce smothered the sage and thyme, I folded their napkins anyway. While my children joked about keeping it simple, I opened the envelope with the new beneficiary's name. That's when I realized I hadn't been cooking for family. I'd been catering to strangers with my last name. So I served one final holiday, then left it all to someone who still knew what a table means. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The wind howled down Walnut Avenue, whipping snow into spirals that clung to Lois's porch railing. Inside, her house smelled like butter and sage, the kind of scent that once made her kids rush in, kicking off boots, shouting for pie. Now, the kitchen timer's final beep went unanswered. Lois adjusted her cardigan and straightened the lace runner on the dining table. The ham glistened under foil, the rolls brushed with butter until golden. Her best china, white with the blue rim, waited patiently. A car door slammed outside. Through the frosted window, she saw Debbie hauling up 2 paper bags printed with bright red walk and roll logos. Lois's smile faltered. She opened the door, heat spilling out into the snow. "Hey, Mom," Debbie said, brushing past her. "Don't worry about setting all that stuff out. We figured takeout would be easier this year." Lois blinked. Easier than what? Debbie was already unpacking boxes onto the counter, the smell of soy sauce colliding with the cinnamon that lingered in the air. "Then you slaving over the stove, you've done enough, Mom." "Done enough," Lois repeated softly. The words landed heavy. Brady followed behind, carrying a plastic bag of forks and napkins. "Hey, Ma." He kissed her cheek absently. "You look great. Smells good in here, though. What did you make?" She gestured to the counter. Pies cooling on racks, stuffing balls crisp and steaming, the glazed ham she'd basted every 30 minutes since dawn. "Oh," he said. "Wow, you, really went all out." Lois kept her voice even. "It's Thanksgiving." Brady gave a half smile and started spreading paper plates on the table. Debbie was already filling cartons with rice, humming under her breath. Then came the late knock, 2 short raps and a giggle. Lindsay. Her granddaughter swept in, face framed by a halo of snowflakes, eyes on her phone. "Hi, Grandma," she chirped, leaning down for a quick hug without looking up from her screen. "We're doing a Thanksgiving vlog, okay? Don't mind the camera." Lois stepped back, the words slow to form. "A what?" But Lindsay was already spinning around, narrating to her followers. "So, this year we decided to keep it chill. Takeout, no stress. Grandma's being adorable. She made actual food, but we told her it's fine." Debbie laughed, half embarrassed. "She's just excited. You know how she gets." Lois looked from one face to another. Debbie's brisk efficiency, Brady's shrug, Lindsay's glowing screen. Her home, her table, had become a backdrop for someone else's content. She swallowed the lump in her throat and turned away before anyone could see. When everyone finally sat, they did so on autopilot. Debbie scrolled through her phone between bites of noodles. Brady took 2 scoops of fried rice and said, "This isn't bad, huh?" Lindsay complained about lighting. No one asked for grace. No one noticed the untouched ham. Lois sat at the head of the table, her hands folded. Steam from the mashed potatoes, real ones, whipped by hand, rose like ghosts. She forced a smile when Lindsay aimed the camera her way. "Grandma, say Happy Thanksgiving." Lois's lips moved, but no sound came out. The laughter around her dulled, muffled under the hum of the refrigerator. Her eyes drifted to the china plates stacked neatly in the cabinet, waiting to be used, waiting for the family that used to show up early and argue over who carved the turkey. She waited for someone to notice her silence. No one did. After the meal, the takeout containers littered the counter like empty promises. Debbie checked her watch. "We should probably head out. Traffic's gonna be crazy." "Thanks for dinner, Mom," Brady said, tossing his plate into the trash. "We'll do something simple again at Christmas, yeah?" Lois didn't answer. They left with hugs that felt like formalities, and the front door clicked shut behind them. The house sank back into stillness. She looked at the table. Half a dozen paper plates, soy sauce stains, chopsticks. Her dishes gleamed untouched, a whole feast gone invisible. Lois gathered the plates in silence, each crinkle of paper echoing too loud in the empty kitchen. She carried the still-wrapped ham to the table, sat down, and sliced a single piece. The knife scraped softly against the porcelain. She took one bite. Salty. Perfect. Pointless. The snow kept falling outside. Lois placed her fork down, folded her napkin neatly, and whispered, "Never again." Her gaze shifted to the window, where the family's taillights glowed faint red through the snow, fading, disappearing into the dark. Her hand tightened around her glass of water. The reflection staring back from the window wasn't the mother they'd dismissed. It was someone new. Quiet, watchful, and already planning. The house still smelled like cinnamon and disappointment. Morning light pressed through the kitchen window, soft but cold, catching the silver edges of the pie tins that lined the counter like soldiers left behind. Apple, pecan, pumpkin, chocolate silk, lemon meringue, and cherry lattice. 6 in all, untouched, their glossy crusts perfect enough for a magazine photo. Lois stood before them in her robe, tying the belt tight around her waist. She'd been awake since 5, staring at the ceiling, replaying last night's hollow laughter, the sound of chopsticks tapping plastic. Her throat ached with everything she hadn't said. She lifted one pie at a time, wrapping each in foil as carefully as if she were tucking in a child. The smell filled her with both pride and nausea. They didn't even look at them. A car door slammed again outside. Too soon. Her pulse quickened, then sank when she saw Lindsay trotting up the driveway, bright coat, phone in hand. "Hey, Grandma!" Lindsay chirped through the glass, tapping her nails on the door. "You still have those pies? I kinda wanted one for a TikTok thing." Lois didn't open the door right away. She just stared, pie in her hands, warmth still rising from its crust. Lindsay smiled, expectant, holding her phone like an offering to a god that only rewarded views. When Lois finally opened the door, the air bit through her slippers. "A TikTok thing?" she repeated. Lindsay grinned. "Yeah, like a holiday montage. You know, cozy grandma vibes, maybe me holding the pie with snow behind me? It'll look so cute." Lois's jaw tightened. "No." Lindsay blinked. "No what?" "No, you can't have one. Not for that." The younger woman laughed, uneasy. "Come on, Grandma, it's just for fun." "I said no." Lois's voice was sharp, clearer than she'd expected it to be. It hung in the cold between them, shocking them both. Lindsay's smile cracked. "Okay, geez. Sorry." She gave a small shrug, stepped back toward her car, and without another word, filmed herself walking away. The engine started. Snow crunched under tires, then silence again. Lois exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that felt like shedding skin. She looked around the kitchen, the pie tins, the cold coffee pot, the plate she'd left at the table last night. Every corner still bore the fingerprints of effort no one had wanted. She packed the pies into old bakery boxes, stacked them 2 by 2, and loaded them into the trunk of her Buick. The engine coughed once before starting. On the passenger seat, she set her keys, her gloves, and a folded note that simply read, "Donation." The streets were quiet, dusted with new snow. Houses along the block still shimmered with twinkling lights, perfect and hollow. She pulled up to the community shelter at 7th and Birch, where she'd dropped casseroles during church drives years ago. The doorbell rang with a weak buzz. A volunteer opened it, young, freckled, tired. Mrs. Carter? Oh wow, that's a lot of pie. Lois smiled faintly. They won't be missed. Inside, the smell of coffee and industrial cleaner met her. Folding tables were set up for breakfast, a few men nodding thanks as she passed. She placed each pie on the counter gently, like setting down proof that someone, somewhere, still cared enough to make things from scratch. When she turned to leave, a voice called, "Miss Lois?" She looked back. A tall, lanky young man in a snow-dusted hoodie came down the hall carrying her mail. Russell Henley, the church volunteer who used to help her after her hip surgery. His grin was as easy as ever. "Found this in your box," he said, holding out an envelope. "Figured I'd swing by after my shift." Lois softened. "You're working here now?" "Kitchen duty," he said proudly. "Holiday rotations." His eyes darted to the pies. "You made all these?" She nodded. Russell's voice lowered, almost reverent. "You didn't buy them?" "Never have." He laughed, shook his head. "Then you're officially the best part of the season." It was such a simple sentence, but it hit somewhere deep. She hadn't realized how long it had been since anyone said something kind without agenda. Russell helped her carry in the last box, then stayed for cleanup. He filled a plate from the shelter's line, turkey hash, mashed potatoes, one slice of her pecan pie. He ate slow, smiling between bites. Lois sat beside him, sipping lukewarm coffee, feeling the warmth of human presence seep back in. When he finished, he wiped his mouth with a napkin and said, "You ever need help around the house again? You just call me, okay? I owe you for teaching me how to make real biscuits." She almost laughed. "We'll see, honey." As he stood to leave, the light hit his face in a way that reminded her of something she used to know. Loyalty, maybe, or gratitude that wasn't staged for a camera. When the door shut behind him, Lois lingered at the counter, tracing her fingers along a leftover crumb of crust. Through the shelter window, the world outside was pale and unkind. But somewhere beneath the frost she felt the faint pulse of something returning. Purpose, maybe. She picked up one of the empty tins, polished it clean, and smiled. The next morning, the house was so quiet Lois could hear the clock in the living room counting seconds like slow drips of regret. The faint smell of cinnamon still floated through the air, mixed now with the metallic tang of cold air slipping under the back door. Every surface gleamed, not from company's admiration, but from her own exhaustion. She moved through the kitchen like someone touring a museum of her own life. The pie tins were gone, the shelter's note of thanks folded neatly on the counter. Only the small things remained. The flour sifter she'd used for decades. The oven mitt burned at the edges, the cutting board dented from 100 Thanksgivings. Her reflection stared back at her from the window over the sink. Pale, still, but not defeated. She rolled up her sleeves. One by one, she laid out her knives. Paring, carving, bread. The blades caught the morning light, thin rainbows glinting along the steel. She drew the sharpening rod down the first knife, slow and deliberate. The sound whispering through the quiet house like a confession. Shk, shk. It wasn't anger she felt. Not exactly. It was focus, the kind that comes after too much noise, when everything unnecessary finally burns away. She washed each knife after sharpening, running warm water over the handles, wiping them dry with a cloth so soft it could have been from a baby blanket. Her hands moved with the same steadiness she once used to comfort her children when they cried. Now, there was no one left to comfort. On the far counter sat a small spiral notebook, its cover faded with flower fingerprints. Lois opened it and began to write in neat cursive, "Holiday Instructions, 2025. She paused, pen hovering, Then, under the title, she wrote a single line: "If you show up, bring your heart. If not, don't bother bringing a dish." The sentence looked almost like a prayer. She closed the notebook and set it beside her recipe box, the old oak one with the brass clasp worn soft at the corners. Her phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the stillness. She didn't recognize the number at first, but the message made her smile before she even finished reading it. "Russell. Mind if I come by again sometime? I could help shovel or just hang out. Your cooking kinda ruined me for everything else." Lois typed back without hesitation. "Lois. Anytime, honey." She pressed send and set the phone down, feeling an unfamiliar warmth settle in her chest. Not joy, exactly. Something sturdier. A sense of being seen. Snow began to fall again outside, gentle this time, like forgiveness. She watched it gather on the window ledge, softening the world into silence. Then she turned back to her cabinet, reaching for the small key hidden behind a row of cookbooks. It fit perfectly into the lockbox, the one she hadn't opened since her mother passed. The lid creaked as it lifted. Inside were recipe cards yellowed with age, written in her mother's elegant hand. Butter biscuits, never margarine, corn pudding for Sunday best, chocolate chess pie, for when the world feels cruel. Lois touched the cards gently, the ink faded but legible, her mother's voice rising up from each line like a whisper of approval. She carried the box to the table, spreading the cards out before her. So much life had come from these: laughter, warmth, the steady rhythm of family. And yet her own children had chosen microwaves and paper plates over all of it. "Not you," she murmured, glancing toward the window as if Russell could hear her through the snow. "You still know what matters." She took a clean card and began to copy one of the recipes. Her handwriting careful, patient, deliberate. She didn't know why she was doing it, not yet. Only that it felt right to prepare for someone who might actually care. The phone buzzed again, one more text lighting the screen. "Russell. Thanks again, Mrs. C. You ever think about teaching me some of those secret recipes?" Her lips curved. "Lois. Maybe sooner than you think." She set the phone down and reached for another card, this one labeled Family Cobbler. The ink bled faintly from age, the edges curling. Outside, the snow thickened, muting the world. Lois pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward her, the edges crisp, the pen smooth. She began writing a list, but this one wasn't for cooking. At the top, she wrote, "People who still deserve a seat," and beneath it, the first name, Russell Henley. By Tuesday, the snow had hardened into gray ridges along the curb, the kind that swallowed car tires and muffled footsteps. Lois sat by the window with her coffee, watching plows carve through the drifts, the steady scrape of metal against asphalt matching the quiet rhythm of her thoughts. Her phone buzzed on the table. "Debbie. Family chat. Let's just keep holidays simple, yeah?" A pause. Then 2 bubbles appeared beneath it. Brady liked the message. Lindsay heart reacted. That was all. No discussion, no thought. Just a digital shrug, signed with emojis. Lois stared at the glowing screen, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. The thread was a history of holidays reduced to logistics, group orders, timestamps, passive okays, a record of absence, neatly organized. She read Debbie's message again. "Keep it simple." Her mouth twitched, the smallest of smiles without warmth. "Simple," she murmured. "Sure." Then she pressed her finger to the screen and held it down until the option appeared. Delete thread. One tap. Gone. The silence that followed was cleaner than anything she'd heard in years. The knock came around noon. 2 firm raps and 1 impatient one. Marjorie Denslow didn't believe in waiting. "Open up, Lois! It's too damn cold to stand out here." Lois chuckled softly. setting down her mug. "You always were dramatic, Marge." Marjorie swept in like a gust of sass and peppermint perfume, shaking snow off her coat. In her arms she carried a leather folder, a portable printer, and the unmistakable air of someone who knew where every penny and paperclip in a household belonged. "Thought we'd get this part handled before the new year," Marjorie said, setting up her printer on the kitchen table. "No time like the present to clean up the past." Lois raised an eyebrow. "You and your sayings. You love them," Marjorie shot back. "Besides, I know how you get when something's weighing on your mind. So," she slapped the folder open, "let's talk business." The hum of the printer filled the kitchen as Marjorie read aloud, her voice steady, precise. "Bequests. Personal effects. Estate property." She glanced up. "You're sure about all this?" Lois nodded, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I've never been more sure of anything." Marjorie hesitated before continuing. "You're removing Debbie and Brady as beneficiaries, correct? And Lindsay? She can have her filters and her followers." Marjorie gave a low whistle. "You're not leaving them anything?" Lois took the pen when it was handed to her. The click of the cap echoed like punctuation in the air. "I already did," she said. 40 years of cooking, cleaning, forgiving, and pretending it mattered. That's enough inheritance for anyone." Each signature came slow but deliberate. The pen glided across the paper, looping through every letter as if she were sealing the past in ink. Marjorie watched quietly. There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding, the kind that came from decades of friendship and funerals. When the final page slid out of the printer, Marjorie stacked it neatly, clipped it, and exhaled. "That's that." Lois sat back, her shoulders loosening for the first time in days. The kitchen light flickered softly overhead, illuminating the brass recipe box still sitting on the counter, her mother's handwriting visible through the lid. "Want to leave them anything?" Marjorie asked gently, the tone halfway between lawyer and friend. Lois tapped the pen against her palm, thinking. The snow outside had turned to sleet, whispering against the window like faint applause. "Yes," she said finally, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the air. "Leave them my silence." Marjorie looked up. "Poetic." "Practical," Lois corrected. "They'll fill it with their own guilt soon enough." A long moment passed before Marjorie smiled faintly. "You always did know how to season revenge." Lois allowed herself a small laugh, not cruel, but certain. "Just using what I've got in the pantry." They signed the last notary page together, the printer's motor clicking off like a closing door. Outside, the storm quieted. When Marjorie left, Lois stood alone in the kitchen again, the papers stacked neatly beside her coffee mug. She placed her hand on them, feeling the faint warmth left by the printer. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt ready. Her phone buzzed once more. A new message. Not from family this time, but from Russell. "Russell. That snow's piling up again. Want me to come by tomorrow? Could bring cocoa this time." Lois smiled, typing back a single word before locking her phone. "Lois. Yes." She folded the will, slid it into the top drawer beside her recipe cards, and whispered, almost to herself, "Time to start new traditions." The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world coated in glassy ice. The sky above St. Paul was the color of pewter, bright and cold enough to make every sound seem sharper. Lois sat by the kitchen window, watching sunlight scatter across the snowbanks like powdered sugar. Her mug of coffee had gone cold, but she didn't care. When the doorbell rang, she half expected Marjorie again. Another round of signatures, another checklist to finalize her quiet rebellion. Instead, when she opened the door, Russell stood there in a flannel coat 2 sizes too big, cheeks pink from the cold, holding a loaf of banana bread wrapped in foil and tied with red yarn. "Morning, Mrs. Carter," he said, voice nervous but warm. "Just wanted to say thanks. That pie you dropped off at the shelter. People are still talking about it. Figured I'd return the favor." Lois tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "You baked that?" He grinned sheepishly. "Tried to. Might be more of a banana experiment, though." Something in his awkward honesty made her smile. "Well," she said, stepping aside, "experiments belong in the kitchen. Come in." The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and the ghost of holidays past. Russell hesitated at the doorway, wiping his boots on the mat. "This place looks like the ones in those old Christmas movies," he said softly. "Used to feel like one, too," Lois replied. "Sit down, honey. I was just thinking about making breakfast." His eyes widened. "You don't have to." "Didn't say I had to." She smiled. "I said I was going to. Now grab that apron off the hook. Let's see what you can do." He obeyed, clumsy but eager, tying the apron like a kid trying to impress his teacher. Lois moved around the kitchen with quiet authority, butter hitting the skillet, flour dusting the air like winter itself. She slid a mixing bowl toward him. "Ever made biscuits from scratch?" Russell shook his head. "Only the pop tube kind. Scares me every time it bursts." Lois chuckled, reaching for the buttermilk. "We'll start with something that doesn't explode." She guided him through the process, her tone steady, patient. "Cold butter, always. Cut it, don't melt it. Flaky layers are earned, not given." He followed her every move, flour streaking his sleeves, concentration furrowing his brow. When he accidentally dropped an egg, Lois laughed for the first time in what felt like months, not the polite chuckle she gave her children, but a real laugh that shook her shoulders. They baked in near silence after that, the rhythm of their work filling the space where small talk might have been. When the biscuits came out of the oven, golden and puffed, Russell stared at them like they were miracles. He took one bite, then another. "You're magic," he said, mouth full. "Just practiced," she replied, though the compliment lingered longer than she expected. Lois reached for her old Polaroid camera, the one she used when her children were young, and snapped a picture before Russell could protest. He blinked at the flash. "What was that for?" She waved the photo as it developed, the faint outline of the two of them coming into view. Her hand steady on the counter, his face lit by morning light. "For my records," she said. Then, almost to herself, "Future heir." Russell grinned. "That's a funny label." "Not really," she murmured. By afternoon, Marjorie returned with her briefcase and a thermos of black coffee. She stopped short when she saw Russell washing dishes at the sink, humming under his breath. "Well," Marjorie said, setting her bag down, "either you've replaced your children or you've hired the world's politest burglar." "Neither," Lois said, eyes twinkling. "He's family." Marjorie raised an eyebrow. "That so?" Lois motioned her toward the table. The new documents were already laid out. Estate transfer forms, updated will references, a notarized affidavit. "I've made adjustments," Lois said, her tone light but unwavering. Marjorie sat, scanning the papers. When she reached the clause, her eyebrows lifted higher. "You're serious?" "I don't do drafts, Marge. You know that." "Estate, house, recipes? All to him?" Lois glanced at Russell, who had turned around, clearly hearing every word. His eyes went wide. "Wait, what?" "No, no. Mrs. Carter. I can't." "Hush," she said gently. "You can, and you will." He froze, his hands still damp from dishwater. "Why me?" She smiled faintly. "Because you showed up. Because you eat what's served. Because you still look at food like it means something." Marjorie nodded slowly. "That's as good a reason as any I've heard." Lois signed the new paperwork, each stroke confident, final. Then she stood, walked to the living room and began pulling boxes from the hall closet. Ones labeled in neat handwriting: Christmas china, quilts, heirlooms. Marjorie watched silently as Lois opened one and began sorting through it. Her mother's silver, a set of embroidered linens, the family Bible. She placed a sticky note on the box lid: non-blood, fully earned. When Russell left that evening, the air outside had turned to amber, sunset bleeding through bare trees. He clutched the Polaroid Lois had given him, the two of them in her kitchen, a faint smile on her lips. A future she hadn't told him was already decided. Lois watched him disappear down the drive, his figure growing smaller until it merged with the snow. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and rested her palm on the envelope Marjorie had left on the counter, the one marked "Executed Copy." For the first time in years, she didn't feel erased. The next afternoon, Lois sat at her kitchen table with the winter sun stretching thin across the linoleum. A soft hum came from the old refrigerator, the only sound in a house that felt freshly claimed, almost sacred. On the counter, her recipe box gleamed beside the cooling rack where the last of Russell's breakfast biscuits rested under a cloth towel. She poured herself a cup of coffee and, out of habit more than interest, reached for her phone. The screen lit up, full of faces that no longer felt familiar. Notifications blinked, hearts, likes, meaningless words that pretended to care. Then she saw it. Lindsay Carter. New post: a takeout container balanced on her manicured hand, her face framed in perfect lighting. Caption: thankful for takeout. No stress, no dishes, all love, family goals. The photo was taken in Lois's kitchen. Her kitchen. Same wallpaper, same curtains, same counter where 6 untouched pies had once cooled. For a long moment Lois didn't move. Her coffee went cold again. Then she tapped the image, zooming in until the edge of her homemade table runner came into view, a pattern she'd stitched by hand 30 years ago. She stared until the screen blurred, her eyes burning from the mix of humiliation and clarity that only comes when truth has nothing left to disguise itself. Without saying a word, she took a screenshot, not to save, but to remember what betrayal looked like in 2025. And then, slowly, she deleted her Facebook account. Every picture, every tag, every smiling post her family had ever weaponized for approval. Gone. When the screen went black, she felt something release inside her. The phone buzzed again a few hours later. A text from Debbie. Debbie. Hey, you okay? You seemed quiet the last few times I called. Lois's thumbs hovered above the keyboard. For years, she'd filled silence with explanations, with softness, with the kind of motherly patience that always ended in her being dismissed. Not this time. Lois. I was absorbing. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. No reply followed. She set the phone down and looked around her kitchen. Every counter wiped clean, every pan stacked with care. It no longer felt like a place of labor. It felt like the center of something she was quietly rebuilding. That evening, snow fell again, gentle flakes swirling against the window. Lois pulled her sweater tight and began peeling apples, crisp, tart, the kind that bit back. The knife slid through the fruit in clean motions. She mixed the slices with cinnamon and sugar, a dash of lemon juice, and folded them into a baking dish. The smell filled the kitchen slowly, warm and forgiving. When the timer dinged, she didn't plate the dessert for herself. Instead, she packed it neatly into a tin and wrapped it with brown paper. On top, she taped a note. For Ruth Henley. Hope you feel stronger soon. With love, Lois. Russell's aunt had been sick for weeks. He'd mentioned it in passing during breakfast, the worry tucked behind his smile. Lois tucked the parcel under her arm and braved the cold. The air was sharp enough to sting her lungs, but she didn't mind. She drove through the quiet neighborhoods of St. Paul, her headlights cutting through frost and shadow. At the Henley house, she knocked softly. Glenn, Russell's uncle, opened the door, a kind-faced man in a wool cardigan. His eyes widened at the sight of her. "Mrs. Carter, you shouldn't be out in this weather." "Just dropping something off," she said, handing him the still warm dish. "Russell said she likes apples." He smiled, touched. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she interrupted gently. He nodded, then studied her expression, calm, resolute, peaceful in a way that unnerved him a little. "Russell says you've been good for him," Glenn said. "You give him a reason to look forward again." Lois's gaze drifted past him, to the dim hallway where family photos hung, smiling faces, framed and unbroken. "We all need a reason," she said softly. Glenn hesitated before adding, "He's lucky to have you in his life. You remind him that showing up still matters." She nodded. "And that's a lesson I'm finally learning too." As she turned to leave, Glenn called after her, voice warm but weighted. "Sometimes silence is the loudest goodbye." Lois paused on the porch, the wind brushing her hair. She looked up at the sky, thick with falling snow, and smiled. "A small, secret thing." "You're right," she whispered to no one in particular. When she got home, the house welcomed her with stillness. She set her gloves on the counter and opened her phone again, not to scroll, but to take one last look at her contacts. Debbie, Brady, Lindsay. Her finger hovered over the names, then she pressed mute all. The phone went quiet. In the corner of the screen, one unread message remained. "Russell. Aunt Ruth says your apple crisp is heaven. You're making me look bad again." Lois smiled, typing back. "Lois. Just keep showing up, honey. That's all the recipe ever needed." The January wind moaned against the siding, carrying with it the kind of cold that froze everything mid-thought. Lois sat in her recliner, the glow of a muted news channel painting soft blue across her face. Her knitting needles clicked idly in her lap, a half-finished scarf pooling like gray water at her knees. The phone on the end table vibrated once. Brady Carter. She hesitated before answering. It had been weeks since any of her children had called, and even then, the conversations had the brittle quality of people fulfilling obligation rather than affection. "Hello, Brady," she said, her tone polite but distant. "Hey, Ma," he said too brightly. "How's the Queen of Walnut Avenue?" "Still breathing," she said dryly. He chuckled awkwardly, as if warming up for a pitch. "Listen, I was just calling to check in. You doing okay? The snow hasn't buried you yet?" Lois smiled faintly. "I've got Russell to shovel when it piles too high. You know, that boy actually shows up when he says he will." Brady's laugh stuttered, thinner now. "Yeah, good for him." A pause followed, the kind that weighed too much to be casual. Lois waited. She knew what came next. "So, Mom?" Brady began, his voice turning careful. "I kinda hate to even ask, but things are tight right now. The heating bills, car repairs, you know how it is. I just need a short-term loan. Like $5,000. I'll pay you back next month, promise." Lois's jaw flexed once before she answered. "Brady," she said evenly, "I don't do short-term anymore." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the hum of the TV. "What does that mean?" he asked, half laughing. "It means I've spent most of my life lending more than money. Time, forgiveness, patience. None of it came back with interest." "Mom, I'm sure you'll figure it out," she said, her tone soft but final. "You're resourceful when it suits you." Brady sighed, frustration cracking through the performance. "You've been different lately. What's going on with you?" Lois leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath her. "I stopped pretending silence didn't have value, that's all." He started to speak again, but she ended the call before he could finish. The sound of disconnection was oddly satisfying. Clean. Absolute. 10 minutes later, another call came in. Debbie. Lois let it ring twice before answering. "Mom, what the hell?" Debbie said without greeting. "Brady's upset. You really turned him down for help?" "Help," Lois repeated. "Is that what he called it?" Debbie's voice was tight with practiced exasperation. "You know how hard he's been working. We're all trying our best. And you've been different. Cold." Lois set her knitting aside, her gaze fixed on the frost crawling along the window pane. "I'm not cold, Debbie. I'm clear." "Clear?" Lois nodded to herself. "Yes. I finally saw everything. All the years I confused guilt for love." On the other end, Debbie was silent for a beat, then scoffed. "You're being dramatic. You're acting like we've done something to you." Lois smiled to herself. "Not to me. For me." Before Debbie could respond, Lois hung up. The house felt lighter once the phone went quiet. In the kitchen, she pulled a roast from the fridge, marbled, tender, thawed just right. She rubbed it with salt, garlic, thyme, and a drizzle of oil, her hands moving with a calm precision that bordered on ritual. The smell filled the air slowly, warm and honest, like truth roasting at 325 degrees. While it cooked, she wrote a short note on her grocery pad. "For Russell. Eat while it's hot. You deserve a good meal today." By dusk, the snow had begun again, thick flakes tumbling through the streetlights. She packed the roast in foil, slid it into a carrier, and drove across town. Russell worked part-time at the culinary school's kitchen now, washing dishes between classes. Lois parked out front and waited for him to step out into the amber light of the parking lot, his hair damp from steam, his face flushed with exhaustion. When he saw her car, his surprise was immediate. "Mrs. Carter? What are you doing here?" She held up the carrier with a grin. "Dinner delivery." He opened it, and the scent of pot roast hit the air like an embrace. "You made this? Again?" "Don't sound so shocked. I had to make sure you're eating real food." He laughed, shaking his head. "You spoil me." "I'm just reminding the world what care looks like," she said softly. Russell's eyes softened. "You know, you don't have to take care of everyone. You've done enough of that." She met his gaze. "Maybe I'm finally giving it to someone who earns it." The snow thickened around them, catching in the halo of the streetlight. Russell nodded, clutching the dish like something sacred. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter. Really." Lois smiled faintly. "Call me Lois, honey. Everyone else already forgot how." That night, back home, Lois sat at her kitchen table again. The phone face down, the room quiet except for the ticking clock. She flipped over the Polaroid of her and Russell, the one from their biscuit morning. She slid it into a new photo frame and placed it right where her family portrait used to hang. For a long time, she studied it. The air smelled faintly of time and closure. Lois had learned to start her mornings slow, not out of fatigue, but choice. A deliberate, luxurious slowness that no one could rush anymore. The coffee brewed while she watched the snowflakes swirl like confetti outside, her house quiet but alive in a way it hadn't been in years. She was halfway through buttering her toast when her phone buzzed across the counter. A notification. Lindsay Carter. New video upload, Holiday with the Hales. Episode 1. Takeout Traditions. Lois almost didn't click it. Almost. The video opened on Lindsay's chirpy voice and a spotless kitchen that wasn't hers. White marble counters, decorative trees, brand name everything. Lindsay faced the camera in a red sweater that read, "Grateful but tired." Her smile practiced. "Hey guys! So today I'm showing you how our family keeps the holidays chill. No cooking stress, no guilt. Just cozy vibes." She gestured toward a spread of catered food containers. Behind her, a man, presumably the Heir in the channel name, arranged matching paper plates while a canned jingle played. Lindsay leaned closer to the lens, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. My grandma used to insist on these giant homemade dinners, but now we're all about balance, right? Self-care over silverware? The camera cut to a slow pan of delivery bags and a caption. Thankful for takeout. Breaking tradition. Lois's hand stilled midair. The toast slipped from her fingers onto the plate. She watched as Lindsay laughed, holding up a store-bought pie with the caption, "As good as Grandma's." Her breath caught, not out of pain, but clarity. She didn't close the video immediately. She simply let it run until Lindsay signed off with her usual sparkle, waving to her online audience with empty hands. Lois exhaled slowly, then pressed pause. Her reflection stared back from the darkened screen. Calm, resolved, done. That's enough, she whispered. By afternoon, Marjorie was back, paperwork tucked in her tote, reading glasses perched halfway down her nose. She stomped snow off her boots before stepping inside. "I assume this call wasn't for coffee?" she said, spotting the familiar look in Lois's eyes, the one that meant decisions had been made before she arrived. Lois slid a folder across the table. Inside, formal trust papers, stamped and notarized. "I'm finalizing something," she said, voice level. "The Carter family recipes, TM? All of them. The rights, the name, the collection. I want it in a trust, held by Russell Henley." Marjorie blinked. "You're trademarking your recipes?" "Protecting them," Lois corrected. "They've been my life's work. And I've decided they belong to someone who treats them like more than background noise." Marjorie let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. "Oh, Lois, they're going to be furious." Lois sipped her coffee, unbothered. "They were careless first." "You realize what this means, right?" Marjorie said, tapping the papers. "The family won't inherit even the legacy. Not the house, not the brand, nothing with your name on it." Lois smiled, faintly but sure. "That's the point. They already walked away from the table. I'm just clearing the chairs." Marjorie studied her friend for a moment. The steady hands, the easy posture. "You're really at peace with this, aren't you?" Lois folded her napkin, deliberate as ever. "Peace isn't something you find. It's something you write into your will." Marjorie couldn't help but grin. "You're colder than the lake in February." "Not cold," Lois said softly, balanced. The printer on the table whirred to life as Marjorie scanned and filed the signed documents. The quiet hum filled the space between them like music. When the machine beeped its final note, Lois stood, collected the fresh pages, and slipped them into a folder labeled "Future of the Carter Name." That evening, the house glowed with the golden warmth of a single lamp. Lois brought out her holiday box from the attic, the one marked Decor, old and stubborn. Inside were stockings she'd embroidered over the decades. Debbie, Brady, Lindsay. She held each one for a moment, fingers tracing the fading thread. Then, slowly, she folded them and set them aside. From a small plastic bag she pulled out a new stocking, plain red, unmarked. She threaded a needle and began stitching by hand. The movements were small, careful, almost meditative. Letter by letter, the name took shape in soft white thread. R-U-S-S-E-L. When she finished, she hung it at the end of the mantel. The fire flickered beneath it, casting a gentle glow across the letters. For the first time in years, the mantel felt complete. Not crowded, not performative, just right. She stepped back, studying the quiet symmetry of her new beginning. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Russell. "Russell. Marjorie stopped by the shelter tonight. Said she had something for me to sign. I'm confused. Did I do something wrong?" Lois smiled faintly, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. She typed back, "Lois. Not wrong, honey, just right on time." She set the phone face down, watching the snow fall heavier outside. The morning of Christmas came quiet and white, the kind of hush that settled over the world like reverence. Snow drifted in slow spirals outside Lois's kitchen window, and for once, the silence inside didn't ache. It shimmered. She moved through her kitchen like a conductor preparing for a symphony. The good china gleamed in the cabinet, white with thin cobalt rims. And for the first time in years, she took it down. Each plate clinked against the counter like a heartbeat. 2 settings. Only 2. The turkey breast roasted in her grandmother's enamel pan, skin bronzing perfectly under the heat. The scent of sage, onion, and butter rolled through the air. She basted, seasoned, folded napkins into tidy triangles. By the time she lit the candles, the table looked like it was waiting for joy, not obligation. At 5:30 sharp, a soft knock came at the door. When she opened it, Russell stood there, a little breathless from the cold, cheeks pink, holding a bouquet of grocery store flowers, red carnations and white lilies, clumsily wrapped but earnest. In his other hand, a pie tin covered in foil. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Carter," he said, smiling sheepishly. Or, "Lois, if I'm allowed that on holidays." Lois chuckled. "Lois is just fine. Get in here before you freeze solid." He stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. The warmth hit him immediately, cinnamon, turkey, and the faint hum of Bing Crosby from the old radio. His eyes widened as he took in the table. "You did all this?" "I did," she said. "Tradition deserves witnesses." He grinned. "Then I'm honored." She took the pie from his hands, setting it carefully on the counter. "What flavor?" He scratched his neck. "Pumpkin. I tried to make it from scratch. Your way." Lois raised an eyebrow. "My way?" "You left your recipe box open last time I visited," he admitted. "I may have peeked." She laughed, a rich, easy sound. "Then I suppose you earned a seat at this table." Dinner unfolded slowly, without rush. Russell carved the turkey under her watchful eye, his slices uneven but full of effort. They talked about everything and nothing: his classes, her memories of running the cafeteria kitchen, the time she once served 200 meatloaf dinners during a power outage. At one point, he raised his glass of apple cider. "To the best cook I've ever met." Lois lifted hers. "To the one person who bothered to show up." They clinked glasses, and in that small golden moment, the house felt alive again. Not with noise, but with meaning. When dinner ended, Russell insisted on cleaning up. Lois let him. She liked the way he hummed off key while scrubbing, the way he dried each dish with care instead of speed. When he finished, she motioned toward the living room. "I've got something for you." On the coffee table lay a wrapped bundle, not fancy, just soft brown paper tied with kitchen twine. Russell frowned. "You didn't have to get me anything." "I didn't get it," Lois said. "I'm giving it." He untied the twine and peeled back the paper. Inside was a thick, worn leather-bound book, edges soft with age, corners gilded faintly with grease stains. On the first page, written in her mother's looping cursive, were the words, "Carter Family Recipes, for generations who still care." Russell's throat bobbed. "Lois, I can't take this." "Yes, you can," she said, firm but kind. "And you will." He looked at her, eyes wet. "But this is your legacy." She smiled. "Legacy only matters if someone tends to it. You'll keep it alive, not for me. For the table." Russell blinked fast, his voice catching. I don't know what to say." Lois reached out, placing a hand over his. Her grip was steady, her eyes bright with quiet satisfaction. "Say nothing. Just keep cooking, keep showing up. That's all I ever wanted." The clock ticked softly behind them, marking the moment in gold and stillness. Outside, wind lifted the snow into small flurries that sparkled under the porch light. Inside, the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the framed Polaroid on the mantel, the one of Lois and Russell baking biscuits, the stocking with his name hanging just beneath it. Lois sat back in her chair, the last glow of candlelight catching her silver hair. She watched Russell flip through the cookbook, tracing recipes like sacred text, his smile equal parts awe and promise. Her phone buzzed once on the counter. Debbie. "Mom, we're on our way. Figured we'd drop by for dessert." Lois stared at the message, then set the phone face down without answering. She turned back to Russell, who was reading aloud from one of the pages. Her mother's note about adding extra butter for people worth the trouble. Lois laughed softly. She knew what she was talking about. The smell of pumpkin pie lingered in the air, warm and steady, like the heartbeat of the house itself. Lois and Russell sat at the kitchen table, plates before them, candles still flickering low even though dinner had long since ended. The world outside was dark, the kind of velvet winter night where sound carries, where every knock feels like it comes from another time. Russell leaned back in his chair, fork still in hand. "You weren't kidding about your crust," he said between bites. "It's unreal." Lois smiled faintly, savoring her own small forkful. "That recipe is older than I am. My mother used to say a good crust is just patience disguised as pastry." He laughed softly. "Then that explains a lot about you." She was about to answer when the sound came. A heavy, hurried knock at the front door. 3 raps. Familiar. Practiced. Lois froze mid-motion, fork poised above her plate. Her eyes flicked to the hallway that led to the foyer. For a moment she thought she'd imagined it. Then came another round. Louder this time, followed by muffled voices. Russell glanced toward the sound, brow furrowing. "You expecting someone?" Lois set her fork down, the metal clinking gently against porcelain. "I was," she said softly. "But not tonight." She rose from her chair and walked to the front window, the floor creaking under her careful steps. She pulled the curtain back just enough to see the porch. There they were. Debbie in her puffy coat tapping her foot in irritation. Brady hunched against the cold, hands jammed into his pockets. And Lindsay, phone in hand, already angling for the perfect shot. Lois could hear her faintly through the glass. "Mom won't even open the door. Unreal. Guess we're not welcome." Holiday drama. The blue glow of the phone screen lit Lindsay's face like a ghost story. Lois's jaw tightened, but there was no anger, only a deep, quiet certainty. She let the curtain fall back into place and turned toward the kitchen. Russell had stood up, uncertain. Was that them? It was? She sat back down, smoothed her napkin over her lap, and picked up her fork. "Pie's getting cold, honey. Don't let it go to waste." He hesitated, glancing toward the hallway. "Do you want me to say something?" "I could tell them—" "No," Lois interrupted gently. "I said it all last year, with my oven." Russell blinked, not sure he'd heard her right. But she was calm, serene even. She took another bite of pie and sighed in quiet satisfaction. "Perfect," she murmured, still warm. The knock came again, this time followed by Debbie's voice, muffled but sharp. "Mom, we know you're in there. We just wanted to talk." Lois didn't move. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clink of Russell's fork as he followed her lead, eating in slow silence. From outside, Lindsay's voice rose again. "Fine, we'll just go. She's clearly lost it." Then the crunch of boots in the snow, the car door slamming, the engine coughing to life. Russell glanced toward the window, then back at Lois. "They left. I know. Don't you feel—" He stopped himself, unsure how to finish. She looked up at him, her expression kind but unshakable. "I feel full," she said simply, for once. The fire popped in the living room, sparks drifting up the flue. She poured them both coffee, her movements slow and sure. Outside, the taillights faded into the darkness until only the snow remained, soft, unbothered, endless. Russell looked down at his cup. "You really meant it, didn't you? About starting new traditions." Lois smiled. "Tradition isn't what you repeat. It's what you protect." They sat together for a long time, the air between them rich with peace and cinnamon. Finally, Russell leaned forward, his tone light but respectful. "So, what happens next?" Lois glanced toward the mantel, the single red stocking embroidered Russell catching the light of the fire. Her eyes softened, but her voice carried quiet conviction. "What happens next," she said, "is dessert." Russell laughed, easing back into his chair, and for the first time, the word family didn't sting when it crossed her mind. The new year came quietly, the kind of January that coated St. Paul in frost so thick it turned every street into a mirror. Lois's house stood serene at the end of Walnut Avenue, its windows glowing soft gold against the blue-white snow. 2 weeks after Christmas, the town clerk's office posted its routine batch of estate filings to the public record: wills, deeds, trusts. The Carter file went live at 9:12 a.m., tucked between names no one paid attention to. But by noon, it had found its way into the wrong inbox. By dinner time, it was everywhere. Facebook post, Lindsay Carter Hale, private group. "Can someone explain why my grandma's estate lists some random guy named Russell Henley as heir to literally everything? Like, everything?" Screenshots spread faster than frost on a window pane. Neighbors whispered over coffee. Former church friends texted in shock. Who was Russell Henley? A caretaker? A scammer? A secret son? By evening, Lois's family group chat, long dormant, burst into digital chaos. Debbie: "This has to be a mistake." Brady: "Marjorie's behind this. She's always hated us." Lindsay: "No. Grandma was tricked. I bet that guy forged something." Debbie: "I'm emailing Marjorie right now. She can't ignore us." At Marjorie Denslow's tidy home office, the email hit her inbox at 8:03 p.m. Subject: Urgent. Estate clarification needed from Debbie Carter Hale. To Marjorie Denslow, executor. "This has gone far enough. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but my mother's estate was supposed to stay in our family. Please call me immediately before I contact an attorney." Marjorie read it once, sighed, and moved the message to her archive folder without reply. Then she poured herself a glass of sherry and whispered toward the framed photo of Lois on her mantel. They really never listened, did they? Brady tried calling next. The first call went straight to voicemail. The second rang twice before the line disconnected. The third ended with the recorded voice he'd never heard before. "The number you're trying to reach has blocked this contact." Brady stared at his phone, the words "call failed" blinking back at him. He set it down, his reflection warped in the screen's glare. The reflection of a man who'd shown up too late to every meal that mattered. Lindsay went digital. She found Russell's Instagram, a handful of photos, the culinary school kitchen, a shelter fundraiser, and one grainy Polaroid of him and Lois, smiling over a bowl of biscuit dough. The caption read simply, "She taught me everything that matters." Lindsay's thumbs hovered. Then she typed, fingers trembling with entitlement disguised as concern. "Lindsay Hale, official. Hey, not sure if you saw, but this estate stuff is blowing up. Can we talk? I think there's been a misunderstanding." The message sent, and stayed unread. Hours passed. She refreshed. Nothing. By morning, Russell had turned off his DMs. At the edge of town, Lois's house slept under a soft blanket of snow. Inside, the fireplace still crackled low. On the kitchen table sat her journal, the same one where she'd once written grocery lists and holiday menus. Tonight, only one line filled the page, the ink steady and sure. Regret. 0. Peace. 100. Beside the open journal sat a mug of cocoa, cooling slowly, and a small stack of envelopes addressed in Lois's looping hand: Marjorie, Glenn, and Ruth Henley, Russell. Each sealed with a tidy piece of floral tape. Underneath them lay a note written years ago, one she'd never mailed. To my children, I hope someday you understand that love isn't what you say over takeout. It's what you do when no one's watching. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Across town, Russell sat in his small apartment above the bakery, Lois's recipe book open beside him. He turned each page like a priest with a prayer book, his hand resting lightly over the inscription she'd written on the inside cover: for the one who showed up. He didn't notice the snow gathering against the window. He didn't hear the hum of notifications flooding his phone downstairs. All he knew was that the world had handed him something he hadn't realized he needed: a family that began, not by blood, but by intention. He whispered, "Thank you, Lois," and kept reading. The world outside was gray and soft, snow dusting the window ledge of room 314 at St. Luke's Medical Center. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and peppermint lotion. Machines whispered quietly around the bed, their rhythm steady but fragile. A heartbeat written in light and sound. Lois opened her eyes slowly. The ceiling above her was too white, too smooth. The kind of blankness that didn't belong to any home she'd ever known. A dry taste lingered on her tongue, and for a moment, she wasn't sure where she was, until she felt a weight near her hand. Russell. His head rested on his folded arms against the mattress, his dark hair mussed, his breath even but heavy with exhaustion. His hand still held hers, fingers curled protectively around her own. For a long while Lois just looked at him, the boy who had once carried her groceries and listened without impatience. The boy who'd come to her table not out of duty, but out of something far rarer: gratitude. "Hey," she whispered, her voice rough as gravel. Russell stirred, blinking awake. The relief that broke across his face was almost childlike. "You scared me," he said softly. "They said you might not wake up tonight." She smiled, faint but sure. "I never skip breakfast," she murmured. He laughed, shaky, wet around the edges, and squeezed her hand. "You had me thinking—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "But I'm still here, honey. Still here." The nurse entered quietly, clipboard in hand, smiling in that way nurses do when they've seen too much to waste words. "Well, look who's awake. You've got a fighter's heart, Mrs. Carter." Lois nodded weakly. "Always have." The nurse checked her vitals, adjusted a blanket. "You should know. Your family finally called," she said, her voice cautious. "They wanted to come by tomorrow, but—" She hesitated, searching for tact. "It's later than they think." Lois's eyes softened, but not with sadness. "They're not the ones who matter," she said simply. Russell's hand tightened around hers. He didn't speak, but his thumb brushed the edge of her palm, a small, silent vow. The nurse smiled sadly and slipped out, leaving them in the quiet hum of machines and the muffled fall of snow outside. After a few minutes, the door opened again, this time to Glenn Henley, his coat dusted with snow, a small wooden case in his hands. "Afternoon, Lois," he said gently. "Russell called me. Thought you might want this." Lois's eyes warmed when she saw the silver chalice inside, the one Glenn used for communion at church. "You always bring the good wine?" she rasped. Glenn smiled and set the tray on the bedside table. "We figured the occasion called for it." Russell bowed his head, while Glenn began, his voice low and reverent. "The body and blood, freely given," he said, breaking the wafer and offering it to her. Lois accepted it, her fingers trembling, her eyes glassy with gratitude. After a moment she whispered, "Forgive me, Father, for leaving early. I've just got supper waiting elsewhere." Glenn smiled through a small hitch in his throat. "I think they've already set the table for you." She chuckled weakly, the sound thin but still unmistakably her. "Make sure they use the real butter," she said. Russell reached forward, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "You don't have to talk," he said softly. "I do," she replied. Her voice was fading, but her eyes were fierce, the same spark that once commanded cafeterias and family dinners alike. "I need you to listen, Russell." He leaned closer, eyes locked on hers. "Promise me," she said. "Promise the recipes stay in hands that love them. Not use them, love them." "I promise," he said, voice breaking. "Not just the food," she whispered. "The heart behind it, the patience, the showing up. That's the real meal." He nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I know, Lois. I know." She squeezed his hand, a slow, deliberate press that said everything words couldn't. Her breathing steadied, a quiet rhythm like the rise and fall of a lullaby. The snow outside deepened, wind sighing against the window pane. Glenn bowed his head in silent prayer, and Russell didn't move, his hand never leaving hers. After a long pause, Lois whispered something so soft he almost missed it. "Tell them." He leaned closer. "Tell them what?" She smiled, her eyes half-lidded, full of peace. "That I finally rested." Then, with the smallest exhale, her hand went still in his. Russell stayed long after the machines quieted. The nurse dimmed the lights. Glenn murmured a final blessing, and the snow fell thicker against the window, blanketing the world in white. He sat there until morning, her hand still in his promise still alive. The church on Summit Avenue was heavy with snow, its steeple slicing through the pale morning sky like a knife. Inside, soft light filtered through stained glass, pooling across rows of wooden pews. The scent of lilies and coffee mingled in the air, grief and comfort, coexisting uneasily. Lois Ann Carter's funeral began exactly the way she'd planned. On time, without fanfare, and according to the schedule typed and signed by her own hand weeks before she died. Marjorie Denslow stood at the pulpit, glasses glinting beneath the sanctuary lights. She was composed, unreadable, the executor in her final act of loyalty. Her black coat was pressed, her tone measured, her posture unyielding. At the back of the church, the Carter family filed in, late, just as Lois would have predicted. Debbie led, chin high, coat immaculate. Brady followed, eyes red but uncertain. Lindsay trailed behind, phone in hand, already recording under the pretense of memories. They expected to be ushered to the front. They expected whispers of sympathy, of recognition. Instead, Marjorie gave a small, almost imperceptible nod toward the third row. Reserved seating clearly labeled immediate family, Russell Henley, and guests. Debbie's mouth fell open. "You've got to be kidding me." But Marjorie didn't flinch. "Mrs. Carter's request," she said. "Please take a seat wherever you can find one." The murmur that rippled through the congregation was a mix of curiosity and judgment. Neighbors, old church friends, former co-workers, each exchanging looks that said so, the rumors were true. At the front of the church, the casket gleamed. Simple pine, hand-polished, adorned with a spray of white roses and a single folded apron laid across the top. Behind it stood Russell. His suit was a little too big, his tie slightly askew, but his hands were steady as he held the folded paper Marjorie had given him that morning. "You sure about this?" he'd asked. "She was," Marjorie replied. "That's enough." Now, as the organ quieted and the crowd hushed, he stepped up to the lectern. His voice trembled on the first word. "My name's Russell Henley," he began, his tone unsure but honest. "Most of you didn't know me. That's okay. Lois always said the best guests don't need introductions. They just show up and help with the dishes. A low ripple of laughter broke the tension. Even Marjorie smiled faintly. Russell glanced down at the page, then away from it. Lois taught me how to cook, sure, but more than that, she taught me how to stay, how to care about something enough not to quit when it gets hard. She said that's what family really means. You don't disappear just because the kitchen gets messy. Debbie shifted in her seat. Lindsay rolled her eyes subtly, her phone still aimed low at her lap, recording. Russell's voice steadied. She left behind recipes, stories, and a will that, well, surprised a few people. But if you knew her, you know she didn't do anything without purpose. She didn't leave out the ones she stopped loving. She left out the ones who stopped showing up. The words hung in the sanctuary like incense, gentle, undeniable. Brady lowered his gaze. Debbie's jaw set tight. Russell folded the paper, his final words quieter now. She told me once that cooking was her way of speaking when no one would listen. I hope today, you'll all hear her loud and clear. He stepped down, leaving the silence to stretch, sacred and heavy. Marjorie took his place only long enough to read the next line from Lois's written instructions. Please proceed to the fellowship hall for refreshments, served warm. Downstairs, the church kitchen buzzed with life. Aluminum trays steamed atop long tables. The smell was unmistakable. Lois's fried chicken, scalloped potatoes, green bean casserole, rolls shiny with butter. Russell moved between the stations like a man on a mission, sleeves rolled up, apron tied firm. His movements were precise, reverent. Every dish had her handwriting taped to it, each one marked from Lois's collection. Guests approached him, offering condolences mixed with awe. You cooked all this? She'd be proud. It tastes just like hers. Russell only smiled. She made sure of it. On every table sat small handmade cards, cream paper trimmed in red thread. Each one bore the same message, printed in Lois's unmistakable cursive. Thank you for showing up. Lindsay picked one up and turned it over for her camera, whispering into her phone's mic. Okay, that's kinda savage, but, iconic. She raised her phone to film the buffet line. Before she could hit record, a firm hand clamped over her lens. Marjorie stood in front of her, gaze unblinking. Not everything's content, sweetheart. Lindsay flushed. I was just grieving? Then try doing it without Wi-Fi. The phone slipped from Lindsay's grip onto the counter. She didn't pick it back up. At the far end of the room, Russell ladled gravy onto an elderly neighbor's plate, his expression calm but distant. When the last guest left, he walked to the sink, turned off the faucet, and looked toward the door leading upstairs to the sanctuary. The light through the stained glass poured across the floor, golden and warm, the same shade as the crust of Lois's biscuits. He could almost hear her voice. Don't forget the butter, honey. Nothing good ever came from going half-hearted. He smiled through the ache. The reading of the will took place 3 days after the funeral, in Marjorie Denslow's office above the hardware store downtown. The space smelled faintly of paper, lemon polish, and old grief. Snow pressed against the windows, blurring the world outside into gray silence. Russell sat near the window, hands clasped in his lap. His coat folded neatly on the chair beside him. He looked out of place, too humble for the mahogany furniture, too honest for the tension in the room. Across from him sat Debbie, Brady, and Lindsay, each dressed in black but radiating impatience instead of mourning. Debbie kept tapping her manicured nail against the table's edge, a tiny percussion of entitlement. Brady stared at his phone. Lindsay scrolled through hers, face lit by the glow of a screen she couldn't look away from. Marjorie stood behind her desk, glasses low on her nose, papers neatly stacked before her. Her voice, when it came, was clear and clinical. The voice of a woman who had read the wills of saints and sinners alike. "All right," she began, flipping to the final notarized page. "This is the last will and testament of Lois Ann Carter, dated December 18th, witnessed and sealed by myself and one Ruth Henley." Debbie straightened. "Just get to the part where the family's inheritance is detailed, please." Marjorie looked up slowly, her eyes cool behind the lenses. "Of course." She adjusted the papers. "To begin." She read the first line without flourish. "I, Lois Ann Carter, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeath the following: my home at 2125 Walnut Avenue, my financial accounts at Midstate Credit Union, and my complete culinary collection, including the Carter Family Recipes TM Trust, to Mr. Russell Henley." The words landed like an earthquake in the quiet room. For a second no one breathed. Then Debbie exploded. "This is insanity!" She slammed her palm on the table, papers fluttering. "You can't be serious, Marjorie. That boy is... he's a stranger." Marjorie didn't flinch. "He was chosen, Mrs. Hale." Lindsay's voice came sharp from behind her phone. "He's not even blood." Marjorie's eyes hardened. "And yet," she said calmly, "he showed up." The words cut through the air, leaving nothing but the low hum of the radiator and the faint scrape of Brady's chair as he shifted uncomfortably. Debbie shot to her feet. She must have been confused, manipulated. He probably filled her head with guilt or... Marjorie's tone turned razor-thin. "Lois Carter was the clearest woman I ever met. She planned this months in advance, in writing, with witnesses. You can yell at me all day, but her pen did the talking." Lindsay's phone trembled in her hands. "You can't just erase us." Marjorie smiled faintly, almost kindly. "She didn't erase you. She just stopped pretending you were listening." Debbie's voice cracked under its own fury. "You think she'd really do this to her own family?" From the corner, Russell finally spoke, his voice low. "She didn't do it to anyone. She did it for herself." All eyes turned to him. He sat still, hands folded, grief etched deep in the corners of his mouth. "She wanted peace," he said quietly, "and I think she earned it." Debbie stared at him as if he'd spoken in another language. "You're telling me you're okay with taking everything she worked for, her house, her recipes, her money, like it's some prize?" Russell looked down at the floor. "It's not a prize," he said softly. "It's a promise." Marjorie cleared her throat. "There's one more part." She reached for a small flash drive resting on the desk and plugged it into her laptop. "Per Lois's request, this should be played during the reading." The screen flickered to life. The room filled with the faint hum of background noise, the sound of Lois's kitchen. Then she appeared, sitting at her table, framed by afternoon light, wearing her blue cardigan and a knowing half-smile. "Hello, darlings," she began, her voice steady as if she were simply announcing Sunday supper. "If you're watching this, it means I've done something that'll rattle you a bit. That's all right. I've spent most of my life cleaning up your messes. You can handle a little shake-up." Debbie gasped. Lindsay's eyes welled, but she didn't lower her phone. Lois continued. "I know you think this is unfair, that I lost my mind, but let me remind you, I'm the same woman who cooked for 40 years straight, through sickness, through loneliness, through your takeout holidays. I didn't lose my mind. I found my clarity." She leaned closer to the camera, eyes sharp, mischievous. "You left the table, so I left the house." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the radiator seemed to stop hissing. Then Lois smiled. Small, proud, final. "You'll be fine. You always land on your feet. But Russell, he'll land here, because he knows what this house is made of. Flour, butter, forgiveness, and showing up on time." The screen went black. Lindsay's phone slipped from her hand onto the floor. Debbie turned away, jaw trembling, while Brady just sat, shoulders caving inward, staring at the screen as though trying to summon her back. Russell didn't move. He just bowed his head, silent tears tracking down his cheeks. Marjorie closed the laptop, the final click echoing like a closing door. "That concludes the reading," she said softly, per Lois's wishes. Russell rose, his voice breaking as he thanked her. Marjorie's gaze softened. "She said you'd understand." The house on Walnut Avenue looked almost the same white trim, the same front steps dusted with snow, the same welcoming wreath on the door. But inside, everything had shifted. The air felt different, lighter, like a burden had been lifted and the house had room to breathe again. This Christmas was different. Russell stood in the kitchen, his apron tied firmly around his waist. The soft hum of the oven filled the air as he pulled a golden brown turkey from the roasting pan, the skin crisp and crackling. On the counter beside him, a bowl of mashed potatoes sat waiting, fluffy and smooth. His hands moved with certainty, guiding every step exactly as Lois had taught him. From the way to carve the meat to the precise tilt of the ladle when serving gravy. The table, too, was a careful replica of Lois's tradition. Her china, the hand-embroidered cloth she'd made herself, the perfect alignment of the silverware, the glasses sparkling under the soft glow of candlelight. 2 spots were filled, but the others were empty. The others who were never meant to return, who'd never earned a seat. Russell had invited the people who mattered. Marjorie sat at the table, her hands folded gently in her lap, her smile steady as she exchanged pleasantries with the neighbors who'd stopped by. The smell of Lois's cooking, the dishes she'd perfected for decades, filled the room with warmth, and for the first time in a year, it felt like a holiday again. Neighbors had come with their families, old friends who had long since drifted away, the ones who remembered the Carter home as a place of warmth, not contention. Russell didn't have to explain. They all knew. They all understood the kind of woman Lois had been, the kind of woman she had wanted her legacy to be. The living room door creaked open as more guests arrived, and Russell turned from the stove just in time to see the first person step in. He could hear the laughter in the hallway, and he felt a sense of pride swelling in his chest. The house was alive again, but this time there were no false expectations, no pretenses. It was the way Lois would have wanted it. Marjorie, as always, sat at the head of the table, her hands resting lightly on her napkin, but it wasn't her that commanded the attention. Above the fireplace, a framed photo of Lois smiled back at them. The same smiling, determined woman who had spent 40 years cooking for everyone but herself. In the picture, Lois wore her favorite blue cardigan, arms crossed in front of her, her apron barely visible beneath it. The same apron that now hung on the back of Russell's chair. A small plaque sat beside the photo, glinting softly in the candlelight. The real matriarch. It was a quiet but fitting tribute, one that Russell had insisted on placing there, knowing that Lois had earned it. Finally, Russell stood, raising his glass high. The room went quiet, the last few guests looking up from their meals as he cleared his throat. "To Lois," Russell said, his voice steady, a slight tremor in the edges. "To the woman who fed everyone but herself." He paused, his eyes glistening with the memory of everything she had given him, everything she had given to all of them. A few tears glistened in the eyes of the neighbors who had known her. They nodded, understanding what Russell meant. Lois had been a woman who had given with a quiet grace, and now her legacy had been fulfilled. The house, her recipes, her traditions, all of it was alive in Russell. He had stepped in where others had failed to show up. The room remained quiet for a beat. Then a soft applause broke the silence. Russell smiled, a little embarrassed, but he held the gaze of every person at the table. "I just want to say, thank you," To all of you. For showing up. Lois would have been proud to see this house full again. The warmth in the room was undeniable. Russell took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it settle on his shoulders. Lois's seat, the one she'd always sat in, would stay empty. She had already filled it once, and no one could ever take her place. As they continued to eat and talk, the house felt full again, full of stories, full of laughter, full of love. The dinner stretched on into the evening, the last of the pie disappearing, the last of the guests leaving, but Lois's presence still hung in the air. The kitchen, the table, the smell of butter and cinnamon, all of it was hers, passed down to Russell. And for the first time, it felt right. Later, after the guests had gone and the kitchen was cleaned, Russell stood in the doorway, watching the snow fall silently outside. He reached up to touch the photo of Lois, his fingers grazing the edge of the frame. "I did it, Lois," he whispered softly to the empty room, to the stillness that filled the house. "I kept it warm. I kept it all warm." The final line from Lois's video, the words she'd left for him, played in his mind. "You showed up. That's all I ever wanted." And he had. He'd shown up for her. For the table. For the legacy that had been waiting all along.